as the title says, yes, it's another MMA video. And no, I'm not giving up on wrestling. So many people have asked me this. That's not the case. It's just that in the last 2 weeks, you've had more MMA stuff going on than probably, I don't know, last year and a half, 2 years. I mean, come on. You've had so much stuff going on in the last, it's hard to ignore. I do like MMA. I do follow MMA. And there's just been more interesting this. So that's what I've been talking about. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Though, the next probably 4 videos will be all wrestling related. So just let me talk about what I want to talk about. That said, as the title says, it says Elite XC, sports versus entertainment, and what that's about is this weekend, Saturday night, Elite XC is going to be putting on their second show on CBS. Now, I don't expect this show to do as good as the first show, mainly because you don't have any Kimbo on there. And and the media coverage hasn't been as big on this one, though, leading up to it, a lot of the media coverage was very negative, and then people turned in to maybe see a train wreck, and then didn't see a train wreck. For those of you that are not aware, they actually kept gaining viewers throughout the show, pretty amazingly, actually, and even with all of the DieHard MMA fans griping and crying and saying that this looked more like the WWE than it did, or pro wrestling than it did MMA, it worked and it was a huge success. Now, I don't expect this to do as big, but I definitely don't expect it to do as big after what I heard this week. Elite XC plans on basically putting on what the diehard fans want. Guess what? That will not work. There's a reason why diehard MMA fans are not promoters, and that is because they don't know how to promote. As much as people don't want to admit it, the greatest promoter in sports is Vince McMahon, because he understands that you have to put sizzle with the rest of it. He's never promoted boxing. He's never done any of that, and I understand that, but the guy can promote. The guy definitely can promote, and if you totally ignore that, you're being ridiculous. Boxing promoters understand that you have to add some form of entertainment into what you're doing, or it will not sell unless people just really want to see the fight. You can't do that. If people don't understand what's going on, don't understand any of that, you can't do that aspect of it. It used to be back before you had competing record labels, and you couldn't have certain record labels on certain networks and all that sort of thing. You would have, amazingly enough, the same thing you had at Affliction, where you would have bands playing, usually during an intermission shows, boxing matches. So as much people as want to complain about Megadeth, the fact of the matter is the people that were there live, everything I've read about anybody that was there live said it worked. Why did it work? It gave the fans something to do in between, the fights. It didn't come off well on television, but from everything I've read, nothing that happened at that event came off as well on television as it did there live. But there was definitely a big disconnect, and they did a very bad job. The Affliction people did, of showing what was going on there live and what was actually, and on television. That there was a big disconnect there. People who were there live and then watched the event later felt. So, that all said, I definitely think it is a mistake for Elite XC to basically go, we're going to basically, everything that worked, apparently, on the first show, we're going to not do. And I think that's a mistake. I definitely feel that, the show needs to be shorter. I think that, showing the cheerleaders numerous times was stupid. I don't think you need to do that. But the rest of it, the ring entrances, the hype about it, the Elite XC stuff that happens on CBS needs to be an event so that people will be more in tune to turn into the Showtimes. The Showtime shows can be for the hardcore MMA guys. There's no question about that. But for an event, because you are on national television, you need to pull in a big rating, or you need to pull on good ratings, and the only way you're going to do that is, yes, you're going to have to add some entertainment value to the show. If you don't, particularly since Elite XC is good, not trying to say anything bad about the fighters, but let's face it, they don't have the top tier fighters. They don't have any of the truly top tier fighters. they have to add something else, and that is that aspect of it. Promotion is the name of the game. And if you're not going to promote a show, if you're not going to get people butts in the seats, then it doesn't do any good if you have, 10 of the best fights in the world, because no one is going to care if people don't know who the fighters are and you're not giving people a reason to watch. The original Elite XC show, as I said, continued to gain ratings. Now, part of that is undoubtedly due to Kimbo and the fact that, I do think people were turning in to watch a train wreck, and they didn't get to get a train wreck. As much as people wanted to run around with their heads cut off and say this was an abomination to MMA, I'm like, what are you talking about? No, it wasn't. I look at it this way. Boxing right now is being saved pretty much by the lighter weights in boxing. And the fact that for a long time, white America didn't care about those. The only ones that cared about them were, Latinos. Those were the only ones that really cared about those weight classes. Well, now, because you had a guy by the name of Prince Nassim who had these elaborate entrances, who was, not a great boxer, but was a great draw because of the entertainment value that he brought, you were able to now have the lighter weights be center stage and be able to have pay-per-views by themselves, something you weren't able to have before. It's the same type of thing. If you add the entertainment element, you're going to bring in more people. You're going to have people who are maybe just casual MMA people, or who, ooh, I like MMA, but, I don't always watch it. Well, I'm going to watch this because it's entertaining. There's a big event feel about it. When you add all of these extra elements to it, you add a big event feel to an event. It's the same thing as the Super Bowl. Super Bowl is more of an event than it is a sporting event. But no one complains about it. No one complains about the fact that, the most Super Bowls aren't good games, because you have the halftime show, which most people turn in just for that. You have the commercials, because it's such an event that, the commercials are an event. The whole thing is an event. It's not a sporting event. It's just an event. And these Elite XC shows should be events. They shouldn't be necessarily just MMA shows, because an MMA show will not sell to the vast majority of the United States. It's got to be an MMA event, and that means you need to have some sort of, loud music, something that is different, something that people are going to turn in and go, ooh, this is different, what is this? And catch people's attention. This show is going to be definitely the show that puts the litmus test, particularly since you don't have a big draw on this show, and also, you're basically taking out a lot of the elements that I do think a lot of people turned in to see, and then kept watching because of it, even though they probably won't admit it. Furthermore, and this is the biggest mistake, I can't believe they're doing this, but the Diaz Nunes thing, they're not even going to show. UFC showed the Tito versus Shamrock, semi-brawl, Shamrock trying to come up over the freaking, I can remember that, and I wasn't even big into UFC at the time. That was a big freaking deal. They showed that everywhere. And Elite XC because, ooh, it was too WWE. Ooh, it was too much like pro wrestling. We can't do that. Won't show it. Which is the biggest freaking mistake I've ever heard in my life. I watched the show just to see this thing. I watched it, was like, wow, they have something boxing would be going crazy over. This is the type of thing boxing promoters dream about. They're like, ooh, can you imagine if we had some in-ring brawl? Imagine what we'd be able to do with that? And Elite XC is like, because the DieHard wrestling fan, or the DieHard MMA fans basically said, we didn't like it, don't put it on TV. MMA is going to have to learn they cannot listen to the DieHard fans. You look at the first Elite XC numbers, you look at the ratings they pulled in. DieHard MMA fans counted for, from what we know, not even 1% of that rating, and yet we're going to listen, Elite XC is going to listen to them for what reason? That is stupid. This is moronic to such a degree that it's not even funny. This is why MMA fans should not be promoters, because they don't understand how to promote, because they don't understand that you have to make things events. I know I said that, but it's the exact same thing. Another thing MMA did, which is completely stupid, is after this event, What did they listen to? They listened to the boxing people who were trashing this event as a joke and a circus act. MMA cannot listen to the boxing people. When they finally get this to their head, I don't know why they do this. I don't know why they listen to the boxing public, because they shouldn't listen to them, because the boxing public wants to see them die. Okay, much the same way they don't like Vince McMahon. They don't like Vince McMahon because in their little minds they see, oh, we're not doing as good as we did because Vince McMahon brought pro wrestling up to the point where people now don't want to watch boxing. Okay, now they look at MMA and they go, oh, well, MMA, boxing's where that is at today because MMA is hurting it. And MMA is hurting boxing. MMA is hurting boxing more than pro wrestling has ever hurt boxing. Okay, so you have people who love boxing, and you know who these people are because they're easy to tell. They're the people that will, on one hand, say, oh, I love boxing, love the sport of boxing, and then call MMA human cockfighting. All right? And yet MMA continues to listen to these people. Why? I don't know. I will never understand this. I understand they want to be a legitimate sport, and in their minds they think, oh, well, if we listen to these people, maybe we'll become a legitimate sport. The thing is if anyone that has watched MMA for a long time, to be conceived by a lot of people to be a legitimate sport and not human cockfighting overnight like that, you know what you'd have to do? You have to get rid of the cages. And no one wants to get rid of the cages. I don't want to get rid of the cages. I don't necessarily dislike the cage. I don't necessarily like the cage. I think there's places for MMA for both the ring and the cage. Okay? But if you show somebody the cage, like UFC, Elite XC, whatever, any MMA that takes place in a cage, people think one way. When you show them the MMA that takes place in the rings, like in a ring, like Pride, anywhere, lots of promotion use rings, they think a completely other way. So the cage is harmful in some ways to MMA in that image. All right. So unless you want to get rid of the cage, which I don't think people should, they should anyways, because people do like the cage. Enough people like the cage that you shouldn't get rid of it. You're not going to be seen as a legit sport if you keep listening to these boxing people who don't want you to do well anyways. And anytime that they see anything that they can negate, anything that they say, oh, boxing would never do that. You're right, boxing would do that and then more. That's the thing. MMA has this idea that the boxing press is this all-almighty, and if we can win them over, we will win over. We'll become mainstream. We'll become even more mainstream. We'll be seen as legitimate. Okay? I got news for you. MMA is legitimate. You're already legitimate. If you would actually go out and get off your asses and would take the fight to boxing instead of being this, oh, well, we're going to respect boxing crap, which is what they do. I understand respecting the boxers, respecting the promoters, respecting the organizations, respecting all of that aspect of it, respecting the people that back this bullcrap that boxing puts on. I don't think so. When a boxing commentator says crap about MMA as a whole, as a community, doesn't need to go after him with venom, but they need to call the guy out and say, what is with this? Why are you coming after us? Why? Because we're actually, taking the battle to your beloved sport and showing them what they should be doing? Come on. And this is why we have Elite XC totally changing their show, which I don't think will work. You're going to a show that wasn't going to get the ratings anyways, and now you're going to take away the one thing that may have gotten people to watch as much as, hey, I wasn't even overall thrilled with it, but the fact of the matter, the ratings are what the ratings were. All right? You don't believe me? Compare the ratings that UFC brings when they put on their live shows, their live big shows, against what the WWE does when they put on Raws. Okay? Weekly Raws. I'm just saying weekly Raws, and compare the two. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Raw is seen more as an event. Okay? Even more than when UFC puts on free shows. And so MMA has to get it through their heads that you have to put on events. And if you're not putting on events, if you're just putting on shows, and trust me, you can put on shows. I'm not saying you can't, because I think there's a place to put on MMA shows. Like I said, Showtime's a good place to put on MMA shows. Like I said in my last video, if UFC decided to put on more televised shows, okay, more televised events, those could be shows and the pay-per-views could be events. You know, this is one thing that as a wrestling fan, you've noticed over the years, as the pay-per-views have become more and more and more, they've lost that special feel. They've lost that event nature. You know, you basically just have WrestleMania, you have the Royal Rumble, and for the most part, that's it. Because you've lost that event feel to these shows, and that helps. That helps sell the show when it has an event feel to it. When you're live and at a show and it has that big event feel. And MMA needs to realize that they're going to have to do this, or you know, they're never they're going to do good. They're going to do great on pay-per-view, but they're never going to force, you know, television to actually take them seriously until they do that. Until they can show numbers and go, what are you going to do? Look, here's the numbers. We're not going to change the way what we're doing, but because what we're doing is working, what you want us to do won't work. All right. So just remember that while you're watching Elite XC. You know, and I'm looking forward to the show because, you know what, I actually get to see women fight. Dana, and, you know, the first show, the women almost stole the show. Dana, who, you know, for whatever reason, he says women don't belong in the UFC, which I don't get because, you know, they are an attraction, and attractions sell, you know, especially when they're good attractions, and the women, for the most part, are good attractions. I would say the women are a much better attraction, I think most people would, than, you know, Kimbo or even, you know, Brock Lesnar. So, and trust me, Brock Lesnar is an attraction as much as freaking, you know, what's worse, having Kimbo or having Brock? As much as people want to say, oh, well, you know, Brock actually has a wrestling background and all of this stuff, come on. I mean, what's really the difference there? All that said, that's it for this one. I just wanted to come on and talk about this and the fact that I think this is completely moronic on Elite XC's part, because you need to, you know, as much as people hate Shaw, as much as they hate Shaw, they need to realize the guy knows how to promote. And I understand that that in their heads they're like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. They need to realize the guy knows how to promote. They need to realize, and the community as a whole needs to realize to stop listening to the boxing people, to tell the boxing people to go take a hike. We're not going to listen to you because you're never going to give us a fair shake anyways. Because we do better than you, and we're damaging your poor little sport. All right? So they're never going to give anyone a fair shake anyways. All of that said, that's it for this one. I rambled a little too longer than I wanted to. Oh, one last thing. I was going to mention, I was going to talk about this before with, you know, all of the events taking place. See, there's so much stuff I can't even talk about. But Affliction apparently is going to put on their second show in October. Fedor and Andre are going to main event. Apparently Babalu has said that he wants to take on Tito. I don't think that would happen. I'd be shocked if it happened. But if it did happen, that's a pretty that right there is a pretty good, you know, two co-main events, I would say. So Flick's definitely going to put on another card. Apparently they are going to change up the card a little bit so they're not wasting as much money. But hey, just wanted to pass that along. That's all. Have a good one. I'm out. Later.